years ago, I did my 100th video, and delightfully, it was of my favorite dinosaur, Carnotaurus, and from PNSO to boot. I was very happy with it in general, but the critique then was the corn-cob appearance of its integument. And since then, much has advanced in terms of fine sculpting by PNSO and other companies. Today, we're going to review the Haolonggood Carnotaurus. It says a lot about how far we've come that Carnotaurus is as part of the mainstream as T-Rex was years ago, so no introduction is needed. The name Carnotaurus means meat-eating bull, and derives from the Latin carno, meaning flesh, and taurus, meaning bull. This model measures 22.5 centimeters or 8.8 inches. Carnotaurus has been estimated to be between 7 to 9 meters or 23 to 29.5 feet. Now, taking 8 meters or 26.3 feet puts this model at 1 to 35 scale. It's 9.5 centimeters or 3.7 inches at the tallest point here of the head. And here's the Wonder Artistic model's 1 to 35 humanoid for an idea of scale. Like most of its models, Haolonggood offers Carnotaurus in two variants. There's a brown and a grey, although it's listed as blue in many other listings. Needless to say, I'm more excited by the grey. Not only is it not brown-based, the grey will differentiate this model from the sea of brown theropods on the shelf. Still, my overall impression is that both are very naturally coloured, with a pleasing subtle fade in the patterns against the skin. The brown in certain lighting actually has a more reddish-brown hue, which is a bit different from many of the PNSO browns. And it has mottlings instead of the same old stripes, and may be sufficiently different from the abundance of brown PNSOs for some of you. The grey has the same skin pattern, but since we're going into detail now, you'll be able to see for yourself straight away, because we're going to the grey. So we start at the head. In general, it's obvious that this is the head of Carnotaurus, short, boxy, blunt, with those two horns. The colour is well applied, and you can see the complexity of the mixes here in the face. It does have very nice texture and detail, as we can appreciate here and elsewhere. And of course, those horns, a main draw of the animal, done rather nicely. However, their very dark nature doesn't allow the kind of fade you'll see in lighter coloured horns. Integument-wise, it doesn't have the excesses often seen in models sculpted with more exuberance, but there are some obvious points that don't conform to recent thought. I'll talk more about this later. For now, I'll comment that it appears a little shrink-wrapped. It also lacks the conified nasal proposed by Delacour 2018. Finally, it has the feature scales claimed by Hendrickx and Bonaparte in the posterior part of the jaws, but their presence has since been questioned. In addition, they also appear to be too large for the scale. Now, there are a couple of things that bother me a little. The eyes have that rather cartoony appearance we saw in Haolonggood's Allosaurus. The posterior part of the jaw is too thick, particularly in the area of the angular. And of course, the jaw is articulated, but it doesn't close fully, so there's a visible gap. Now, I'm not one to get my knickers in a knot over lips, but liplessness does cause an obvious overbite. A quick once-over now of the head detail. The neck is nice and thick and leads us down the body. And I really like how this orange band comes down the side here, nicely separating the grey-brown and the orange-brown. The body is nice visually and texturally. I'll talk more about integument in the science part of the video, but here the feature scales might look ordered along the sides, but to my eye actually look a bit random as well, with a few stragglers. If intentional, this actually agrees with the latest thinking following Hendrickx and Bell, who suggest they should be a lot more randomly scattered. In any case, because of how subtle and understated they are, any rows aren't obvious at all, and this is a big plus point for me. Like traditional reconstructions, there's a central line of dermal scutes down the midline. However, they're small and subtle, so we can rest easy on the adage that the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Within reason, of course. I've seen all kinds of ridiculous ideas based on this argument. And from the top here is really the best place to show you how beautifully the colors are layered. From the dark in the midline, then coming down to the dark brown, the light brown, segueing into the grey, then back to the browns again. This is the same idea down the entire animal as well. Down here in the pectoral area, you'll see a deep chest, which is reflective of the large scapular coracoid beneath, for the attachment of the powerful neck muscles that generate that X-like motion during a hunt. Now the arms. You guys know I'm nuts about these strange appendages. The proportions and shape are generally acceptable, to me at least, with the kind of fatty soft tissue that befits a useless appendage. However, the unguals are an issue. According to Ruiz 2011, the only mention of an ungual is a bony piece articulating at the end of digit 3. Now, following the pattern of most archosaurs, phalanges 1 and 2 may also have been tipped with unguals, but we don't know how many segments were lost. And some have argued it's possible there were no unguals at all. Digit 4 is highly unusual. It appears to be a single conical metacarpal and quite unlikely to be articulating with an ungual. It's also quite long. In any case, these claws appear to be painted on. So if you're so minded, you could just wipe them off. But the overall suggestion of the Carnotaurus hand is there. And here in the belly area, it does look a little too wrinkly. And likewise here in the thighs and legs. And speaking of which, since we don't have anything below the knees, it's been given the leggy proportions typical of many reconstructions. Just a look at that detail here. And now the tail. Now I've talked about the caudofemoralis muscle before in the PNSO Carnotaurus review, and here we need only say the inferred thickness of the tail is almost as unique a part of the Carnotaurus identity as the horns and useless arms. The caudal ribs are oriented not horizontally but upwards. You can see how this creates more volume for the caudofemoralis to fill. Unfortunately, Haolonggood falls far short of the expected bulk. And just a look again at the paint application in the overall model. Very nice. Alright, so much for the model itself. Let's get to the science, and today we're going to talk integument of Carnotaurus. For the longest time, Carnotaurus was cited as an example of a theropod with well-preserved skin. It was first described in 1985, but inexplicably, the much vaunted integument has never been fully described or figured. It was actually very hard to find images when I did my last couple of Carnotaurus reviews. Even the Cherkas and Cherkas paper in 1997 was very hard to find, and surprisingly doesn't even show you many photos of the replica they made. It was only in 2021, when Hendrickx and Bell fully described and figured the various skin patches we have, that we all got a really good look. So first, here's how Carnotaurus is typically reconstructed. It's always been fodder for imagination of all kinds of complexities, with of course those osteoderms, which really should be called feature scales since they lack a bone core. And these ordered rows of them down the sides has been considered SOP in many a model. However, with the work of Hendrickx and Bell, we know this classic look shouldn't be the case. Let's take the head. Now both Bonaparte and the Cherkas claim feature scales were present in the posterior part of the jaws, as you can see in the region of the quadratojugal and articular, but these extensive areas of skin impressions were supposedly lost during preparation. And in these two field photos of the right side, there's no obvious pattern of scales. Now there have been rumors of preserved skin around the head and even lips, but they can't be substantiated and impossible to differentiate from hematite concretions and suggest more pareidolia than proof. Now since there isn't any proof, Hendrickx and Bell suggested feature scales should be considered hypothetical, so while certainly still possible, equally possible is a smoother appearance in the face, something quite radical if you've been a Carnotaurus fan for over 20 years. And so sadly, much in this beautiful den folks bust might never have happened. However, the face isn't completely devoid of features of interest. Hieronymus in 2009 proposed osteological correlates for different surface skin features. For example, the cornified sheath from the wing spur of a crested screamer, the skull roof of the green iguana, the frontal boss of the muskox, the nasal boss of the white rhinoceros, and the armor-like dermis on the premaxilla of the hippopotamus. And based on work like this, different kinds of skin structures can be inferred or proposed, showing that even without feature scales, Carnotaurus could still have textured skin. For example, Delacour 2018 inferred from the coarse pitting and grooving on the dorsal surfaces of the skull a cornified cover seen on muskoxen and centrosaurines. In the horn, the neurovascular grooves, depressed lip, and less rugosity suggest that horns could have extended more than the fossil and then covered with keratin. Surprisingly, horns have in general been modeled rather conservatively, which makes sense given the smaller bone cores compared to the ceratopsians. But I wonder if any mainstream company will decide to be the first to try something a bit more outrageous, such as this. As you can see in our Haolonggood, it lacks that cornified nasal. And the frontal horns are pretty conservative. Now what about the body? And here, Hendrickx and Bell finally reveal in full delicious detail the skin fragments found with the holotype. There are 7 main areas, but I'll just cover a few. First, here's some skin from the anterior cervical region, and notice the 2 anterior cervical ribs here. There's no particular pattern, no identifiable basement or feature scales, suggesting that this area might have been devoid of scales. However, the story is different in the thoracic area. 2 fragments were found. In this one directly associated with the rib, there are clear basement and feature scales. And by the way, this is a negative epi-relief, so the feature scales show as concave indentations and not convex bumps. And here's a close-up of the anterior feature scales, which is 28mm or 1.1 inch across. The apex appears to be in the center, which gives us an idea of their 3-dimensional shape. Now a look at the posterior feature scale. We see that like the anterior one, they don't show any ornamentation. In the other thoracic fragment, clusters of basement scales can be seen. You also see these cut-off feature scales, so we don't know if their apices were in the center, which would inform our reconstruction of their morphology. And in the close-up, you see the basement scales here, which are not clearly delineated. Some of them seem to have a polarity, as seen in these more oblong ones, oriented in the same direction. Because we don't know the exact orientation of this block, we don't know the direction of their flow. Now what about the scapular region? And here we have skin from the scapular coracoid. And just to orientate you as to what we're looking at, outlining the scapular coracoid here in red, this is the corresponding area. You can see here two feature scales, and turning it on its side somewhat, we have this. Of interest is that the apices this time are off-center. There are also two different types of basement scale. This part here, you'll see diamond-shaped basement scales, while over here, you'll see more hexagonal ones. The diamond-shaped ones are about 9 by 7 mm or 0.4 by 0.3 inches. The hexagonal ones are up to 13 by 7 mm or 0.5 by 0.3 inches. Now the point here is that while interesting up very close, these are going to be invisible on a 1:35 scale model. And so the feature scales are really the only things you might even imagine would be visible, and the rest is all artistic license. And finally, we can look at the largest patch of skin from the anterior portion of the tail. And I think in this close-up, you'll see there's quite a mix of interesting features. For example, vertical ridges, feature scales with off-center apices, basement scales which are subcircular, elliptical, or lenticular in outline. Again, none of these will be visible to the naked eye on a 1:35 scale model. And taken together, Hendrickx and Bell came up with a reconstruction like this. And we take a look at a close-up, you'll see a face that's rather smooth, feature scales scattered randomly throughout that seem to be of the same size and shape, although their apices are not positioned the same. Now, our Haolonggood is a bit of a conundrum. From some angles I see linearity, but not in the highly demarcated rows you see in other models. In my opinion, it follows more the newer Bell and Hendrickx idea, and any rows are just lines you may see from a group of scattered dots. It has feature scales in the posterior jaws, but it's not proven they weren't there, just that the proof no longer exists. The midline dermal scutes are very small and subtle. In general, I'm happy with the skin here. It comes closer to any other model I have to the subtlety suggested in the Bell and Hendrickx paper. So great job, Haolonggood! So that's it for part 1. In part 2, we're going to look at the brown Carnotaurus and do the comparisons.